And we're back. The season's over. Codcast season 3, episode 10. The Codcast season's not over. I'm your host, Matt Pajak. The Cape League season's over. We have a champion, Bourne Braves. The last show we had Harry on, and we were talking about a playoff preview, and we had mentioned all the reasons why it was going to be certain teams, and that it ends up being Waite versus Bourne, and Bourne ends up winning their third championship in the last 4 years, building a little bit of a dynasty out there. But yeah, it was a really fast week to get to the Cape League Championship game. YD, Pickler, I should have known. Don't bet against Pick in the playoffs. Got his boys to within a couple games of winning the Cape League Championship after finishing 4th in the East. We got a lot to talk about. And I'm bringing in someone who is a Massachusetts native, works for Baseball America, a past guest on the Codcast in previous seasons, prospect writer Geoff Pontes, who's been covering the Cape for years. He was at a number of playoff games over the course of the last 2 weeks. And he's going to come in. He's going to share what he saw, maybe some players that he liked this summer. We're going to talk all things Cape League, but we're going to start with the playoffs. And then from there, we'll see where it goes. Geoff obviously has a lot of professional insights that he can provide. Really excited to talk to him. Let's get him in here now, and let's talk Cape League Championship, Bourne Braves, everything leading up to it. Welcoming on now, Geoff Pontes, Baseball America, native Massachusettsian. What do we even call ourselves? I just blanked.
I'm just going to go with Massachusetts resident because I don't want to use the less appropriate, moniker for those of us that grew up in Massachusetts. I'm a southeastern Massachusetts guy. I grew up right over the bridge, probably 20 miles from the bridge, grew up going to the Cape my whole life and had a lot of friends locally, guys that I, grew up with that played in the Cape too.
Yeah, Geoff has a lot in common with Wareham. He's almost on the Cape. Grew up almost on the Cape. No, Geoff, I appreciate you taking some time to jump on. I know you were out at playoff games pretty much every day. And just a little bit of color here. The last time we had a podcast was pre-postseason. Me and Harry, one of the staff writers for the Cape, came on. We previewed this thing. We teed up Orleans. We teed up Harwich, where like these teams have been consistent all year. It wasn't Orleans, it wasn't Harwich representing the East in the championship. And then I will say this: we were both pretty hot on Cotuit because we felt like Cotuit had maybe like their win-loss record wasn't indicative of some of the underlying statistics that they were drumming up. So that was kind of a dark horse favorite for both of us. And in the end, it ended up being Bourne again. You saw a lot of Cotuit. You saw a lot of Bourne. Just a quick recap. Bourne beat Hyannis. Cotuit beat Wareham in that first round of the playoffs. Harwich and YD advanced over Brewster and Orleans. Bourne beat Cotuit. YD beat Harwich. Don't bet against Pick in the playoffs. The 4-seed YD Red Sox ran out of gas as Bourne swept in the championship series 2-0. And Bourne wins their third title in the last 4 years. And the only year that they didn't win in there was last year, of course, when the upstart of all upstarts, Harwich Mariners, took them down. So Bourne's got a little bit of a dynasty going. And I feel like maybe that's not being talked about enough, but there's a lot of good things going on there. I want to talk about the MVP of the championship series, Jon LeGrande, who I know you're a big fan of. But before we get into any of that, Geoff, let's talk about Cotuit a little bit, because I know you got a soft spot in your heart for Cotuit. You're a longtime Kettleers fan, and you saw plenty of them down the stretch and in the playoffs. what did you see out of them that kind of reflected what we were predicting heading into the playoffs?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing that was in their advantage this year, and I'm sure it's, when you're talking about the numbers, the pitching performance, for the Kets throughout the summer was pretty good. Believe they had, the lowest amount of runs allowed going into the playoffs. That was pretty consistent. They got really big performances in the first round from like Peyton Monka, who started that clinching game. And then even in the the actual Western, division finals or whatever you want to say. They got some big performances, on Saturday, from trying to draw on a blank right now off the top of my head. Local guy Buckler, who was a Marston Mills guy, went to Barnstable High, and then I think ended up at Wichita. So they actually had two guys between Monka and him who both attended Wichita and were local products, Massachusetts, born and bred sort of pitchers. Monka went to P27 after that before going to Florida State. So thought that was kind of an interesting story too, right? You had a local guy that came in during the playoffs, in a pinch, makes a big start for them, throws 5 hitless, scoreless innings, did walk 5, which is kind of unusual for him. But the performance was really good. And he had a solid year for them on the Cape as well. Of course, like 10 appearances, the numbers were pretty good. So Buckler was a big one. And then it's kind of funny because then you go into like Sunday's deciding game, and Cotuit is up early, and then in the 5th inning, things really unraveled. It's kind of funny because up to that point, Max Hogg, who had started for Cotuit, righty out of George Washington, I believe had a perfect game going into the 5th inning. So he was really shutting down that Braves offense, which is pretty good. And I think particularly, at the top of that lineup, we'll probably get into that a little bit. Other things that I think, were going in Cotuit's favor. It was a solid lineup. I don't think that there were, you didn't have the Tommy Troy, or the Nick Gonzalez, or even like that Tanner Thatch, or Cole Mathis that we've seen over the last handful of years, were like a really true offensive force, like kind of in the middle of that lineup. They kind of did it by like situational hitting, a lot of guys that could move runners along. And then, it kind of came down to like, whether it was Beaver or Jack Natilli kind of driving in runs in the middle of that order. Bogenpol, like, was just really inconsistent throughout the playoffs. The tools are all there. It's kind of like a Jace Laviolette starter kit. He's 6'6", center fielder, athletic. There's raw power there. There's on base skills. There's a lot of swing and miss. The angles are really, really flat. So he's a guy, just like from a pro perspective, there's a lot of tools there, but there's also a lot of stuff that kind of needs to get cleaned up a little bit. He's a tough player in a playoff situation, particularly in the Cape, where catching barrels is just such a significant difference there versus what you're doing in college with metal bats. And it's more than just even the equipment. It's more than just the bats. I think you're dealing with a heavy marine layer on the Cape. There's a lot more drag on the ball. So stuff that you hit really clean, is 370 out to the warning track. And some of these smaller parks too. And, guys were coming back to the bench because we kind of were sitting, me and my coworker, Peter Flyer, were kind of sitting over by the Cotuit bench. And so we're hearing what guys are saying as they're coming off. And it's like, like consistently, like, I thought I caught that. Like, I hit that ball at school and that thing's 3 rows deep into the outfield, and you're not sort of seeing that sort of stuff. I thought they were really good defensively. And I think there's 2 players in particular that kind of were the straw that stirred the drink, to steal an expression from Reggie Jackson. Camden Johnson Wichita State guy for his first 2 years. He's headed to Oklahoma this year. I would say he was one of my favorite players in the Cape. Just kind of quintessential leadoff type. He's got speed. He's not, I've seen some base runners with Cotuit that are all-time base runners. I've seen Victor Scott. I've seen, I've seen Chandler Simpson. I've seen some guys that can really wreak havoc on the bases. He's not like that. But he is a plus runner. He's a good base runner. He's a really heady player, and really clutch. Like anytime that team over the last couple of weeks that I was sitting on Cotuit needed a big hit, needed a big play in the field, it seemed like Johnson came up with it. Good bat to ball skills. It's not big power. He finally hit his first home run of the summer in the playoffs. Big spot for him, obviously. But more of, a doubles and triples kind of slug guy. Plays a phenomenal third base as well. They had Ryan Farber at shortstop. He's the other guy that I was going to talk about a little bit. Not the most tooled up guy, not the rangiest guy at shortstop, but sort of fits that profile of the sum of his parts middle infielder that really has enough of everything. And, his actions are really, really clean. His internal clock is really, really good. So he just makes plays. First step, like he just knows how to play the position. And there's little things, just even, turning a double play and sort of where his feet were and where he set up on the bag to receive the throw and, be able to give himself a lane to be able to make that play to first base. Little stuff like that. When you watch him day after day, he does that. Just an 80 makeup kind of kid as well. Actually sat with him at the Hyannis Bourne deciding game in the first round and chatted with him a little bit. He was at Texas State. He's headed to Auburn in the SEC this year. It's not a huge bat, but he can hit a little bit. Good contact. There's probably a little more power there, especially when he's not in the Cape, and he's hit with metal bats. But just a really good ball player that makes a lot of good decisions. I think the two of those guys kind of made this lineup work, made it work defensively because they held down the left side of that infield so well. And, I think that in the Cape, those little things, how well you run the bases, throwing strikes, making plays in the field. I mean, that matters at any level of baseball, but, it's not like pro ball or the SEC where you can kind of slug your way out of some of those mistakes. You really can't do that on the Capes. You do have to execute. And I think players like this are a big deal. So those are the two guys that I think, I really want to call out in terms of what they did, what they performed. They're really good ball players. Not going to be day one guys, probably later on day two next year. But, might be guys like a Brooks Baldwin, who I saw here in, 22, who's a really good ball player, not going to be a star, but he's a major leaguer pretty quickly because he does so many things well. And I think both of these guys do that as well, that they could be really valuable bench players at some point here. So,
yeah. And I just want to hop in here. And I think that's, obviously appreciate you being thorough on Camden and Ryne. I mean, both these guys were around the Cape all summer. And there's another guy we're going to talk about here in a minute who won the MVP of the championship series, Jon LeGrande. He's another guy who was around all summer. And I think there's something to that as far as these teams making a push and getting all the way to, the end of the summer with these same guys that have some consistency in the lineup. Now, I want to go back to Ryan Farber for a second. I've been hearing about this guy for years. I got some connections down in Texas. There's a guy who's been watching him. He went to a smaller high school down in the Houston area. Always performed, I believe it was the Houston area. Always performed in high school, committed to Texas State. And that's really what you just said has been on him ever since he was, 16 years old, is this guy hits, he plays the game clean, he does everything right, the effort's there, the makeup's great. And he performed at the high school level. He performed big time as a freshman at Texas State. Something happened this past year where it took a step back. But I think the summer that he just had on the Cape kind of like puts him back in the conversation. He's going to Auburn. He'll be nice balance for that lineup. They're returning some toolsy guys, Cade Ballou, Chris Rembert. Obviously, Rembert's got as big of tools as anybody in this next draft class in terms of speed, power, potential. Ryan Farber is going to be a perfect balance for Auburn to insert into that lineup as more of a skills guy. Like, okay, so now you got the tools, you got the guy who can keep the thing, keep the order moving. And like you said, and you said it multiple times in there, like marine layer on the Cape, it's hard to catch it with wood, get it on the barrel, and like it might still not go out. Well, when Ryan Farber's swinging metal in the SEC, he might be good for 12, 15 home runs next year. We don't know. There's going to be, obviously a lot of other dangerous bats in that lineup. He's going to have opportunities to kind of show some slug. So, two really good position players there to reaffirm what I was saying before. They were there all summer, which was continuity that Cotuit needed. They didn't have that bopper in the middle of the lineup. And Geoff, it wasn't for a lack of trying. Earlier in the summer, they brought in Rentaro Sasaki. That didn't work out. Bogan Pole, obviously some of the biggest tools on the Cape, like you mentioned, Jace LaViolette starter kit. And he probably didn't perform the way that maybe they thought he had a chance to. In the end, they came up short to a really good Bourne team. So I do want to talk about Bourne. You've seen a lot of Bourne. What propelled Bourne forward past Cotuit and then into that championship series?
I think, just the quality of their pen. I mean, this is something that Landers deserves a ton of credit for because he's built an absolute wagon. I mean, they have won every single West championship in the playoffs dating back to the pandemic. The last time that another team besides Bourne won the West was 2019 when Cotuit did it with Nick Gonzalez, and like half the guys on that team are either retired or in the big leagues at this point, right? So I think that's something that like Landers needs a lot of credit for building these rosters, consistently getting good talent. And I think the thing that you look at is he has the ability to bring in top-notch offensive players that stick around for the whole summer. Dalton Rushing, right, was one, stuck around for the whole summer. You go back to Matt Shaw, stuck around for the whole summer. And there's been a whole bunch of them since. There's always these Waite guys, etc., some stuff coming out of the pen. They always have a stopper. I think the way that they build their rosters and they have the ability to play you however you want to play them. You want to slug, they can slug with you. You want to, bring out a bunch of different guys from the bullpen with good stuff. They can do that. You want to play the game of, hitting the ball to the gaps and down the line and moving runners along. They can do that. And I mean, they did that ad nauseum against Hyannis. They did it in multiple games against Cotuit. And then they just rolled through YD in that championship series. And I think you really point to the top of that order, and it's a really good group. Like you have Gavin Kelly there, who's a good hitter. He's a 27, right? He's not even a 26, right?
Yeah, you might see him again next year.
Yeah, exactly. You then have Cade Lewis, was Big East freshman of the year at Butler, transfers to Wake Forest. He has a good year. Defensively, there's a lot of questions there. Offensively, that's a really good bat. That's a big league bat. There's power, there's contact. He takes what you give him. There's not a lot of swing and miss. He wasn't great for me, but Braden Holcomb had a pretty good summer, his second summer here on the Cape. Hit 285, 361, 328. So the slug wasn't there. The guy, though, that I want to call out in that Bourne lineup, the one that I thought was the most exciting player and could end up being the best player of this group that we've talked about so far when it's all said and done, is Ryker Waite. Switch hitter, really didn't play. I don't think, did he even see an at-bat at Vandy this year? He's a 27. He's really exciting. Really good summer over 33 games with Bourne. 287, 409, 417, had a couple of homers, couple of triples, 4 doubles, 13 steals. He's a guy that like every time he came up, it was like, all right, what's he going to do now? And I think that you put Waite in YD or Hyannis, somewhere where the ball travels a little bit more, he's probably putting up even bigger numbers. Because Bourne is a funky park. It seems like the ball travels. It's a great doubles and triples park because of the alleys and the corners and the way you get some bounces off of that weird outfield playing surface. But it's tough to put it out there. And, Waite was a guy that every time I saw him across the 5 or 6 games that I saw with Bourne, I thought he was super impressive. He's pretty twitchy. It looks a lot like Chase Mydroth if Chase Mydroth could like run and potentially like, looked like a shortstop when he was in the Cape. He's looked like a shortstop in the big leagues at times, but it's kind of like a similar profile with more upside, and it's like the same body and build. He's a little guy, but there's a lot of big tools in there. I like Ryker Waite a lot. He was my favorite player on Bourne.
So you mentioned that you didn't play with Andy this past spring. That's correct. And maybe rightfully so, because how many 18-year-olds are playing in the SEC? As of today, as of this recording, Ryker Waite just put up one of the better offensive Cape seasons of any player that played on the Cape. He's not even 19 yet. He's still 18 years old as of today. So that's even more impressive. He won't be draft eligible for another couple of years, it looks like. Which I don't know. I'd have to do some background on that. I feel like I just watched him play in high school very recently. Maybe he enrolled early. Maybe he didn't enroll early. Maybe I caught him at the end of his senior year of high school. I thought he was a junior. Maybe he sped up his calendar. I'm not entirely sure. But nonetheless, Ryker Waite, really impressive. You brought up Caden Lewis. Braden Holcomb. These guys were just, again, it comes back to these are the guys that were around all summer. I know you guys have a top prospects list coming out here soon from the Cape. It's a lot of guys that were in for a couple of weeks or, went Team USA or whatever it might be, but a lot of really impressive players hung around and were part of the reason why a team like Bourne, kind of quietly turned it on down the stretch and did it again. So that's all really interesting. A guy that I want to talk about that we haven't talked about in depth yet, and you like this guy, and he won the Cape League MVP, and he was around all summer from St. John's, Jon LeGrande. What can you tell me about Jon LeGrande as a player, and what can you tell me about what he contributed to that Bourne team that ultimately ended up winning the Cape League championship?
Yeah. I think that he was sort of like the spark plug in that lineup. LeGrande, super fast. He was hitting toward the bottom of the lineup in certain games, depending upon who was there. But he hit 409 in the playoffs, ripping doubles down the line, a ton of speed, put pressure consistently, on opposing defenses. He had a huge hit in that clinching game against Hyannis. He had a huge hit in that clinching game against Cotuit. Obviously, he had the game-winning walk-off hit against Cotuit. So pretty big hit in the 12th, right? But just had the ability to slash down the line. The thing that I love about him, and this is just even digging into some of the numbers from the regular season, his approach is phenomenal. Really high zone swing, really high heart swing. So pitches dead middle, those zones, he's swinging 85% of the time, which is a great number. He's not passive at all, but he rarely chases. So he's got this approach where he rarely expands the zone, keeps it in the zone, makes a lot of contact. The angles are really good, and it's a little more power than you expect. I don't know where this goes as a pro player. He spent 2 years at Wabash Valley and then transferred to St. John's. So he's technically been eligible for the draft the last 3 years. Nobody's taken him. He's going to go back to St. John's, has a 4th year there. We'll see how that works out if somebody takes a shot on him as a senior sign. I think as a late round senior sign next year, this is probably a pretty awesome pick just because dude can really play. He's got a bunch of different skills. Kind kind of a gritty New York City kid. He's from the Bronx, went to George Washington High School, same high school that produced Rod Carew and Manny Ramirez. Granted, Ramirez isn't a Hall of Famer, but probably should be based on his performance. That's 2 Hall of Famers right there. And LeGrande had a good career there. And Wabash Valley, obviously, top-notch JUCO out in Illinois too. So guy that's played at a bunch of different teams, just a big gamer and kind of a grinder type. I really liked him.
Yeah, I mean, he really stamped it this summer on the Cape, right? Like, I think you mentioned, a couple times there, Wabash Valley, right? Like, how many JUCO position players are drafting and signing at this point? Like, it's less than 10 in any given draft, right? So really, like this year at St. John's was kind of like his first crack at Division I baseball, and then he comes to the Cape, he performs, he'll be a senior next year. Like, he's going to go at some point. What he put on wax this summer on the Cape is enough of a track record for someone to pull the trigger on him next year in the draft, barring, something crazy doesn't happen in the spring where, he stops playing baseball or whatever it is. But yeah, awesome for the kid, straight across the board, especially the JUCO to St. John's journey. And, then coming to the Cape, performing all summer, and then, winning Cape League MVP and the Bourne Braves won the championship. I mean, just a really great story, and look forward to see kind of where his baseball career goes from here. But there's one last note that I want to make on this Bourne team, and then I'll kick it to you if you have any last notes on the Cape League playoffs and Bourne. And I just want to point out that something that's become a staple the past couple of years, given the current state of the college game, is that pitching's hard to find come the end of July and the beginning of August. You mentioned how the quality of the Bourne bullpen. You also mentioned some Massachusetts natives. The Massachusetts natives you were mentioning are, Power 4 pitchers, which is great. And there's always like a New England tie. It always feels like there's some kind of New England tie to the Cape League playoffs. Last year it was Harwich closing out the championship series with a guy who was pitching in the Park League a couple weeks before that. I think he was a UMass Lowell or UMass Dartmouth kid. But it's kind of nice when you're the Bourne Braves and you're able to throw a left-handed pitcher from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, a top 10 program in the country, and you're throwing a lefty who got starts for a top 10 team in the country this past spring, in the championship game. I mean, that's a luxury to throw a Power 4 arm who got starts for a top 10 team in the country in August on the Cape. And he didn't have the best summer on the Cape, but when it mattered most, he showed up and he did what he needed to do against Waite. Bourne ended up winning the championship. That's Folger Boaz. I hope I'm saying that right. I feel like you could say it 3 or 4 different ways. I feel like I heard the announcer in Chapel Hill say Folger Boaz, so that's what I'm going to go with. So tip of the cap to him. And, again, to your point.
They had 2 of those, because I thought you were talking Tim Lawson for a second, who started the deciding game against Cotuit. Another lefty from North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So they had a few of them.
Hey, for anybody from UNC Chapel Hill or Wake Forest or Duke, I think Duke might be in maybe not Duke. UNC Chapel Hill for sure, though. They sent their arms to the Cape this summer, and those guys were here all summer. You got there was another one in Harwich, Olin Johnson. Wake Forest sent arms to the summer that hung around all summer. So, obviously a tip of the cap to them and to those college programs for, kind of helping the Cape maintain its tradition. You can still come up here and throw 30 innings on the Cape in the summer, have a good summer, stay all the way till the end. And it's not going to set you back when you get back to campus in the fall. And these guys are kind of proof of that. And, obviously the guys that hung around to the end, you mentioned Lawson, Folger Boaz, everyone that was in the lineups for Bourne and Waite, they got to experience a level of competitive baseball that a lot of these guys just aren't getting elsewhere, and with wood bats and in front of a different type of crowd on a very, humble baseball field. So in a very historic setting. So a lot of a lot of really good experience, a lot of really good things to say, on the players that tip a cap. It's a long summer. They hung around, and Bourne obviously was rewarded with the championship, but memories for everyone else, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think like you really hit the nail on the head just in terms of the environments. Like, it's summer ball and it's laid back and all that sort of stuff. But it hits a point where these teams are familiar with each other enough, particularly within the divisions, where some rivalries spark up a little bit, and you might have teammates on each side of the ball, right? I think if I remember correctly, Jack Natili's roommate from Cincinnati was on Bourne. So it's like you have guys that play together, live together a good chunk of the year. They're now facing each other. There's some friendly rivalries there as well. Things also get heated. Things certainly got heated in the Hyannis Bourne, and Bourne always sort of plays a little swagger. Their home environment is really loud. Bourne is, and this isn't an insult to anyone else, Bourne is a less transient town in the Cape. There's a lot of full-time residents that live over the bridge there in Bourne, year-round residents. So there's a point of their identity and some pride that's taken in this. And, they may not have the picturesque setting that Orleans has, or, the history or popularity that Chatham has. But I think you go to those games, you hear those Bourne bells going, you hear the same, host families that have been there all throughout this run on the side, cheering on their guys, wearing jerseys of their players. I mean, like, there's a lot of passion that goes into it. And I think, though Bourne can be vocal, though they can be aggressive, I think that you really do sort of feel the love for the league and the connection between the community of Bourne and that team, and all that they represent. Bourne's a gritty community, man. And they play a gritty brand of baseball. They always show up big, and the lineup changes, man, but they just seem to remain clutch. I don't know what Landers is doing there, but he puts together one of the most clutch rosters year after year, and that's why they've been in the championship 5 years in a row.
Yeah, and on the history note, Bourne did have a great tradition in their old ballpark. I can't remember what it was called, of sunset delays. I don't know how many people listening to this know about a sunset delay, but the way that the ballpark was situated, they needed to delay the game when the sunset was going down over the center field wall, because it essentially blinded the hitters. So that used to be a thing. Now they're playing at Doran Park, which maybe has a little less charm to it, but a little bit more fluency to the game. Geoff, I want to kind of end this and wrap this, where we kind of get away from talking about the playoffs a little bit. And you've covered the Cape for a number of years and years and years. You're not that old, but you've watched a lot of baseball around the Cape League ball fields, and you're very involved professionally in evaluating players, writing about players, prospect lists. You've seen players at every level of the game. I want you to talk a little bit about some of your favorite players that you saw on the Cape this summer, or that played on the Cape this summer. Talk a little bit about why you like those guys. I mean, you don't have to go too deep on the list. Just give me 2 or 3 guys that kind of stood out to you that you could see making some noise next July in the draft.
Yeah, I think the first one is Chris Hacopian. Was at Maryland with his brother for a couple of years, entered the transfer portal. He's going to be at Texas A&M. The numbers don't jump off the page to you. He hit 258, 333, 364. The power wasn't there as much as you would have expected in a park like Waite, where it typically travels. But, I think if you watched enough of this guy, you watched enough Waite games, that he consistently catches barrels. The approach is there. The bat to ball ability is there. He can play multiple spots in the infield. I think, of all the guys that I saw, I thought that, I would probably put the highest sort of draft grade on Hacopian in terms of what I think scales and works in the major leagues. So I think he would probably be number one for me. Jarren Advincula, who won the most outstanding pro prospect on the Cape this summer, now at Georgia Tech, was at Cal for a couple of years. He won the batting title as an underclassman last summer, returns to the Cape, has another good year. It's a hit tool second base sort of profile. He's not going to play shortstop. He's going to play second base. There's not big power. It's probably above average speed. Maybe you'll get some plus run times. He's a good base runner, but it's a guy who's going to hit for average and get on base. I think he's a solid pro prospect. We've seen more of these profiles work in recent years as, contact and speed have become a bigger part of the game and just moving along. And one other guy that I wanted to sort of throw out there, he's in our top 10 Cape list, but I think the best pitcher on the Cape, just from a prospect perspective, was Jake McCoy, left-handed pitcher. He was at South Carolina and just transferred to, you might know off the top of your head. I'm like drawing a blank right now as to where he's going to. But the numbers are pretty good. He was like, I think, not great, actually pretty bad at South Carolina. Stuff really ticked up this summer. It's kind of an interesting slot combination with the fastball. Doesn't get a lot of ride on it, but he gets a pretty significant amount of cut. He's got a nice little baby sweeper, nice, low 80s changeup with some splitter type movement. He'll mix in a cutter as well. The fastball velocity from the regular season was like 92.9 was the average. He jumped up to 94.3 during Cape play. Saw excellent results with a fastball slider combination. I think he's really interesting, Jake McCoy.
Yeah, that's Jake McCoy was a guy we talked about a lot at the beginning of the season because he was donating $23 per strikeout. To a can't remember the name of the group off the top of my head, Purple Hearts organization. Donated a lot of money because he punched a lot of guys during his time in Harwich, and then obviously jumped out of there. So McCoy, Vincula obviously is a well-seasoned Cape prospect. Chris Hacopian. What was the stat we had on Hacopian before we went
Also, I'm wrong. McCoy is staying at South Carolina.
Yeah, I looked that up while you were talking about it, and I didn't see anything. So
cool.
Chris Hacopian struck out 6 times all summer.
Yep.
Is that correct? So, Geoff, this was great. I appreciate you making some time. Come on here, talk playoffs, share your expertise, share your point of view. Always enjoy picking your brain and your viewpoint on a lot of these guys. So, let's wrap the bow on this podcast. That's been another episode. Actually, before we do, Geoff, when you come over the bridge, what is your favorite Cape Cod food staple?
Ooh, dude, I don't necessarily eat a ton in the Cape because stuff is closed. I'll always grab a sandwich from the Cotuit market if I'm over there early. Like if Nolan's my youngest is doing camp, we'll stick around in between and hang out at the field. We'll go grab a sandwich at Cotuit market. I'd say my go-to though is really any of the stuff like downtown Harwich. There's always a decent amount of good eats there. Certainly stuff you'll run into in Chatham. Really any of those I was talking to my dad about this yesterday, but any of those traditional New England sort of fair restaurants where it's you get a nice restaurant kind of on the water. The menu isn't fancy. They're not doing anything special. It's just kind of meat and potatoes sort of meals, good clam chowder, good fish dishes.
They got the steamers.
All that stuff. Steamers, exactly. So it's when I go to the Cape, I want to go and I want to eat seafood. I like seafood.
Right.
I grew up in Taunton, New Bedford area, so in Portuguese, so a lot of seafood in the culture and just the stuff we eat on Sunday dinners after church or whatever. So yeah, man, I'm all about the seafood restaurants when I'm out there, but it's been a couple of years since I've stayed. I will next year, but it's been a couple of years since I've stayed on the actual Cape for a couple of weeks. So with the family, I think I need to do that next year, and I'll come back with better recommendations. You got to listen to DeVito about that stuff. He's been killing the Cape with his DeVito food reviews. So
I got to catch
up on him and tell people to go listen to what he says. He's got donut shops and crazy sandwiches on Nantucket, all this stuff, you know.
Well, he did hole in one last week, and I'm a big hole in one fan. So
yeah, hole in one is really good.
I will say that eating a donut from hole in one donut is like a whole meal. It's like one of the most dense donuts. It's
I'll skip lunch.
Like Krispy Kremes. Yeah, it's like it holds you over. But for Geoff Pontes, this is Matt Pajak. It's been another episode of the Codcast. Really appreciate you guys tuning in all summer. Have a great day.